Welcome back, everyone, to the Pet Cash Pod presented by Profluence Sparks. Excited to have Nic on today. Curling. I've heard a lot about it recently. Relay Ventures I've gone pretty close with, so they've been in my ear about this huge opportunity. And so anyway, Nic, I appreciate you coming on today and excited to get the rundown.
Andrew, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really glad that our venture partner is being as confident and excited about this project as we all are. That's great to hear. Love those cheerleaders.
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking about a different niche sport, and it just kept coming back to curling. And I'm like, all right, let's. And it was just funny. Your PR team obviously reached out. I was like, all right, well, it must be a sign we need to go explore this deeper. So anyway, give us before we get into the curling group and all the cool things you're doing and just the landscape of that. Tell us a little bit who you are. Keep it quick, short, brief, and then we'll run it from there.
Yeah, man, super quick. I mean, I've been an entrepreneur primarily in the media and gaming space for almost 2 decades. But, I like to think of myself really as a brand builder. That's what I love doing the most. I built what became the 3rd biggest daily fantasy sports company in the US called Monkey Knife Fight. Launched that in launched that in the fall of 2019, sold to Bally for 90 million USD. In January of 21. And then I got given the keys to help build the team, build the brand for PointsBet up in Canada, a sports gambling company that Fanatics purchased the US division of that business. So that's the kind of the backdrop of the Fanatics sportsbook business. And I came across curling after doing a partnership deal with a group in Canada. And I just couldn't stop thinking about it for years. And I mean, let's face it, you and I both are very aware of the market trends and the tailwinds within the, you said it, niche sport, secondary sport kind of industry. I like to think of curling more as an underserved sport, and I just kept thinking about it and kept seeing all of the activity within the private equity and venture worlds and how there's legitimately a new asset class that's opened up around league, team, franchise, IP, and the opportunity to help grow and build an Olympic massive global sport was something that I could not stop thinking about. And so, as any good passionate entrepreneur does, who is not risk averse, the opportunity came and I took it.
Super cool. And what was your exposure, I guess, to curling before, where you, obviously I'm assuming it's bigger in Canada than it is here in the States, at least right now, what was your exposure prior to, jumping full time into this venture?
Yeah, man, I'm not a curler. I think I've curled a couple times in my life, but I remember walking into my very first curling event after doing a partnership deal with a group called Curling Canada via PointsBet. And I walked into my first curling event, and like most people, I watched curling every 4 years during the Olympics, right? But I didn't really know too much about it. So I walked into my very first curling event, and I was expecting, older, less physically capable white men, right? I walked in, and I was struck by how diverse the teams were. It was men and women, incredibly athletic, and really exciting in-venue experience. And then as soon as the games ended, I found myself in a bar having a couple drinks with some buddies, and the curlers I was just watching on the ice were standing around me and interacting with the fans. And I was just like, wow, this is not what I expected. And that was really the first impression that I had. And then, as any good entrepreneur, any good, leader, executive, whoever, thinker does, is I started doing some research and I started digging. And as you start peeling back the onion of curling, I got completely obsessed.
Yeah, that was where I was going next, is as you started to then research it, what did you uncover? What did you see? Because obviously, just because you like something, being an entrepreneur, you're not just going to go do it. Like, you want to make sure the market's big enough, there's opportunity. I know you brought up some macro tailwinds of, hey, private equity is more interested in backing these things now. But what did you uncover when you started looking into the actual, we'll just call it the market sizing even of curling?
Yeah, so there are a couple big things that I realized. The first was I saw very quickly how truly global the sport was and how big it was, especially in Asia, which I was really quite surprised by. I mean, having the Olympics in Nagano, the Olympics in Beijing, in Pyeongchang, obviously really helped with the spark over there. Some of the best female curling teams in the world happen to be from Japan and Korea. And, ironically, or I shouldn't say ironically, luckily, the women's Chinese team just won a bronze in the world championships. And let's face it, countries like to support the teams that are doing well. There is a patriotic energy within all sport. But then I realized that, or I understood that curling is actually the most watched Winter Olympics sport. That blew me away. Now, I'm not talking about kind of peak audience number. I'm talking about over the entirety of a Winter Olympics, curling is the number one most watched sport. That's a pretty exciting. That's a pretty exciting fact. I also learned that during the Olympics, curling is the most searched Google term in the US every 4 years. So the analogy I use a lot is the thing that really struck me is that I've never really come across a business opportunity in sport or otherwise where you know definitively exactly when lightning is going to strike the clock tower. Every 4 years, curling blows up all over the world, and then it slips because there hasn't been a real business model behind the sport. The sports historically have been run by a bunch of national sports organizations that are effectively not-for-profit. And then I just started doing some more digging. I learned that there were a bunch of NFL former stars and current stars that love curling. A former NFL Pro Bowl quarterback, Mark Bulger, opened up a curling club and a curling bar in Nashville. I was like, wait, Nashville, really? Because to your point, curling historically has been much bigger in Canada than it has been anywhere else in the world. Now, it's not a Canadian sport. It was actually invented in Scotland. But because within the world of curling, there is something called the Grand Slam of Curling, which is effectively the only event series around the world that features the world's best men curling teams and women curling teams. It was actually the first professional sports event that had equal prize money for both men and women, which is also really exciting. The issue that I uncovered was curling's growth globally had been stunted because the company that owned the Grand Slam of Curling, Rogers Sportsnet, their priority is the Canadian market. So even though they owned and operated the only event series that featured the world's best curlers, they didn't maximize the revenue and the distribution and the engagement opportunity globally because that wasn't their business. So as kind of one leaf of the onion got peeled back, I just couldn't help but think that there was a massive opportunity to try and acquire the Grand Slam of Curling and use that as the foundational launch pad to build toward the Olympics that we know is going to have a massive global appeal, and then launch the sport off.
Yeah, then how do you sustain, I guess now, and I'm sure these are a lot of your internal discussions, but you get that big spike at the Olympics, and then now it's, okay, how do we draw people in to tune in? I know you have events coming up here shortly, I think over the next couple of weeks. How do you, sustain that then over those 4 years and bring those fans in full time, or at least what's the plan to go and do that?
It's a great question. And that's really what we've been spending the last, year and a half really thinking about. I mean, I think the first is, the great thing about sport now is that it's not just about sport. It's also about culture and community, right? And the thing that drew me into the sport of curling, the sport is fun. I quite enjoy watching it now. Again, admittedly, I haven't played it very frequently, but I enjoy watching it. But what really brought me into the world of curling was the culture of the sport, was the culture of the curler, was the culture of the curling fan. These curlers are incredibly relatable, fun, smart, funny athletes, and they've never had a spotlight shown on them. So I think that there is a really incredible opportunity to capitalize on the culture and the characters in the curling world to help sustain interest in the sport between the events. But then it's also about trying to reinvent what those events can be. We're not going to be inventing anything from scratch. We're going to play on what's worked in other sports. There are playbooks out there that we're now able to pick and choose from. As an example, with golf, I would argue that golf, the demographic of golf and the impression of golf from the casual fan completely changed with what happened at the Waste Management and Phoenix Open, where an event actually focused on having fun and creating, shining a spotlight on the lifestyle of what it's like to be a fun golf fan. And that really opened up more fans to that sport. Curling is no different. We want to change the energy and the impression of what people have about going to curling events. And we own the Grand Slam of Curling now. We've had an incredible first season. Really, what we want to be able to do is create new events, create different events that we're going to be able to use to help maintain that audience. We want to think about new event structures, new event formats, basically the thing that got me the most excited about curling is it's literally a blank canvas, right? You have this incredible global sport that's played by incredible male and female athletes, right? That have a global audience, and yet there hasn't been any defined real structure as far as growth. So it gives a brand builder, and it gives kind of gives private equity and venture an opportunity to take this opportunity, knowing that it is this massive global world's best property, and start picking and choosing from the things that worked in other sports and kind of sprinkle it on top of this and like let it grow.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Now, from I guess comparison perspective, when you look, people watch a lot of basketball or NBA fans will watch NFL football. Does curling have sort of like you see a big pullover audience like from somewhere? I know like other sports have started to go into other ones to start to pull that are synergistic or similar, like golf and tennis somewhat go hand in hand, right? Do you have any in that in the curling world, or is it sort of in its own little island, at least for right now?
No, it's a really good question, and I think obviously because of the predominance of the curling audience right now in Canada, just because of the way the content has been distributed, there is a lot of crossover between hockey and between golf up here in Canada. Now, I will say that what we're starting to see, because we launched this past fall was our first event formally as owners of the Grand Slam of Curling. And our first event was in October. And the very first thing that we did was we launched an app and we launched streaming of every game that we have. There's approximately 70 games within each Grand Slam of Curling event. They typically go from Tuesday through Sunday. And for the first time ever, we produced a stream of every single game, and we distributed it around the world via our platform. We have our own app, the Grand Slam of Curling app. And without spending $1 in marketing, we've had over 1.2 million unique fans around the world engage in curling. And what's really exciting for us is we're averaging 2 hours per user per view. So we're starting to see this really engaged audience that finally is going to allow us to really tap into some of the data that you're referring to around the correlations between a curling fan and other fans. I will say that Canada has our biggest audience. The US is our number 2 most streamed audience, followed by Japan and Korea. And then Europe, countries in Europe, obviously the Scotlands and the Italys and the Switzerlands and the Swedens of the world, which are where a lot of the curling teams obviously are from. But the fact that the US, Japan, and Korea are, the kind of in the top 4, that's really exciting for us. And so to your point, let's face it, we live and breathe by data. So I'm really excited now that we finally be able to expose a global audience to curling to start learning about where those correlations live. Because let's face it, that's how you can actually grow proper brand, right? Because brand is how, in my opinion, a sport like curling needs to grow, because we have the world's best athletes. We have the world's best events. So now if we can grow the brand and the culture of the sport, those are some pretty sexy pieces to be able to play off.
Yeah, no, the data's key. And as you guys came in, like how much, I know you talked about how you're looking at potentially, altering the events a little bit, but how much of this was already in a good spot? You guys are just putting extra attention and marketing and publicity to it, versus how much are you going and saying, hey, like we're going to build new things, build on top? Like, do you look to change not rules, but like, do you put other iterations in? Like, how much is just, hey, we had this, now let's amplify it, versus, okay, there's something here, but we need to like really come in and alter, I guess?
Oh yeah, well, I'd say it's alter, it's innovate, it's amplify, it's all of it. So I'll give you a really good example. I come from the sports betting world, and what's crazy to me is that there's very little betting on curling, like little to none. There's 4 or 5 operators that offer pre-match core markets only. And for the sake of your audience, we don't need to get too deeply into the weeds of kind of gambling vernacular. The very first thing that we did is we constructed a deal with Alt Sports Data. And I think you had Joe Dunnigan, the awesome CEO of Alt, on a pod of yours, a couple months ago or whatever. So the very first thing that we did was we structured a deal with Alt for 2 very important things. One, the way that data has been collected within the sport of curling is completely nascent. It's literally drop down. It's like desktop computers, mouses, and drop down menus. Nothing is nothing is as deep and live in real time and as analytical as you need it for two reasons. One, you need to have proper data so you can eventually build those models to drive projections engines that you can deliver via API to sports betting operators so you can actually allow the operator to offer betting to their consumers. And you and I both know how excited operators are now to offer gambling on a lot of these underserved sports, right? The one thing that I've learned is that the gamblers love one thing, gambling, right? And then the second really important use of this data is name a sport right now where the teams, the athletes, the media companies, and the content producers aren't diving into the deep analytical stats and data to help improve performance, to help improve the fan engagement opportunities and help improve watching on broadcast, right? I mean, we're in the business of fun. So to answer your question, curling is a really great sport. I think that traditionalism has stunted its growth. And so what we're trying to do is bring a level of energy and fresh innovation to the sport without upsetting the apple cart, so to speak, because let's face it, you want to fish where the fishes are, right? The last thing that we want to do as we're building this company is to objectify the core revenue driver or the core revenue generators right now, which are our traditional hardcore fans. But at the same time, we want to be able to open this up to not only new fans, but new revenue streams. As one of the other first things that we did is we opened up an online store literally for our first event. I'd never been able to buy a curling hat before. Now, I don't walk around without one on because, when you're building brand, hey, free billboard, right? I'm happy to play the role. But to answer your question, it's kind of all of the above. And that's what excites me the most from a brand builder is you have your data and your gaming, you have your merchandise, you have digital content. Let's face it, the younger sports fan today watches sports in a different way than we ever did when we were growing up. Short form, snackable pieces of real compelling content that can be served, whether real time or on demand, across a number of different platforms that they have on their phone. And here we have these incredible international athletes that have never been marketed, never really have created content around, so we can tell great stories, right? We can give brands opportunities to connect with young sports fans through this new male and female pro sport that already has a massive global audience. And to me, it's just all opportunity, right?
Yeah, and that was going to my next point on the athlete side. I mean, maybe I'm not the core demographic, and hopefully I will be soon, but I couldn't name one professional curler, right? And so obviously there's a divide. And if I look at pickleball, I can name 2 players only, right? And if I cricket, I can name 2, right? So I at least have a few. How do you guys now go about building up the athletes? Because like you said, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, the younger generations are often through athletes and players in the social content up the top of the funnel to eventually the media channels, right? So how are you, or what is the plan to then go boost your athletes? So now I'm on this podcast going, yeah, John Doe, I love following him, this curler, blah, 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 blah.
So obviously we're working pretty aggressively with a bunch of influencers, there's a bunch of celebrities who love curling. There's a bunch of current NFL stars who are investors in our business. So we're actually going to start, and we've already started, helping educate the curler themselves that it's a rising tide lifts all boats, right? We can't build profile for them. They have to do it a lot themselves. And so we have to give them the tools and the education around what makes efficient and effective social media content and growth. But we have a cheat code, man. It's oh, sorry. I swear frequently.
You can swear.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we got a cheat code. And I fucking love the fact that we know that February of 2026, the media companies around the world are going to create the star system for us because curling is the most watched Winter Olympic sport, as I was saying. There are going to be compelling stories that are going to be created during the Olympics featuring these curlers. So you might know the name of a curler today, but I guarantee you in a year from now, you are going to know Rachel Homan and Corey Dropkin and Alina Patz, and you're going to know Bruce Mowat and Brad Jacobs. And, I'm throwing out names because obviously we don't know exactly who the Olympic curlers are going to be. But these characters, regardless, I'm biased because I've gone to know these incredible characters. But we know that there are going to be, I should know this off the top of my head, but 10 men's teams and 10 women Olympic curling teams. There's going to be over 80 athletes a year from now that the world media are going to fall over themselves to tell stories around, because curling is that omnipresent sport during the Winter Olympics, right? Because it starts 2 days before the opening ceremonies and goes in closing ceremonies. So we got a fucking cheat code, man. So yeah, are we going to work starting 8 months ago to help build profile for curlers? Yes, absolutely. Are we going to continue to do that over the next month before the end of curling season and then, leading into next season? Absolutely. But the goal is, how do we harness and leverage the power of the Olympics and then use that as the rocket ship to blast off to the next stage of this sport? Because I'll tell you, the way this sport looks today is not the way the sport's going to look right after the Olympics. Because that's the plan, right? Is how do we capitalize on that moment and use that as the true global launch pad, knowing that we already have a global sport that has 284 million people that have watched more than 10 hours of curling each year. Like, that's a big number. A lot of these niche secondary sports that are trying to invent pro leagues, they don't have those kind of numbers. They don't have that global audience. They don't have men and women. We have it all, and we have world's best. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about getting the story of what we're doing out there.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Now, refresh me. So when you guys do this league, you have teams, obviously. It's not national based? Is it just draft? How does that work for crafting the teams within your league?
So that's what's interesting, is there actually is no formal curling league yet. There is no professional curling league yet. The Grand Slam of Curling features teams from all over the world. They are all national teams. And basically they work through a point scoring system to qualify for Grand Slam events. These teams are typically known by the last name of their skip, which is like the quarterback. Each team has 4 players. There's a lead, a second, a third, and a skip who throws fourth. The great thing, so in the Olympics, only 1 team per gender qualifies per country, right? So, and the teams have to qualify, but we'll use Canada, we'll use the US or Canada as an example. There'll be a men's team from Canada and a men's team, a men and female team. The great thing about the Grand Slam of Curling is we actually have the best curling in the world, because we're not gated by 1 per country. So as an example, our Players' Championship, which is the final curling event for the Grand Slam season, is actually next week in Toronto. And we have multiple teams from Canada, multiple teams from Japan, multiple teams from Scotland. We have teams representing multiple teams from Switzerland, from Sweden, Korea, the US, obviously. So that's how the current Grand Slam system works. Now, are we thinking about new types of events and formats for the sport? Absolutely. Right. As an example, our Players' Championship is next week in Toronto from Tuesday the 8th through Sunday the 13th. On the Monday, April 7th, we're actually hosting and producing the first ever Battle of the Sexes in curling. Well, I think there was a Battle of the Sexes a number of years ago, but it wasn't like a formal event like this, where the number 1 men's team in the world, Bruce Mowat from Scotland, and his team, is facing Rachel Homan and her team from Canada, the number 1, the current women's world champion. And the tickets sold out. We're playing it at the old Maple Leaf Gardens. It sold out in like 2.5 weeks. We're streaming it live for free for fans all over the world. The GrandSlamofCurling.com and our app and all that kind of stuff. It will be the most streamed event of the year, and we are gonna make it a party. We're gonna try a bunch of fun things that I think is gonna blow the traditional curling people's minds in a really good way. And I hope casual fans that tune in are going to see these awesome athletes. And the cool thing about the curling, Andrew, or one of the cool things, is all the players are mic'd. So all the players are mic'd. So you're going to hear the women, you're going to hear the girls and the guys chirping each other and having fun. And the other cool thing about curling that I really like, and I know we're getting into the weeds here, is curling, I think, is the only sport where the team that's about to do a shot, about to make a play, actually tells the other team, everybody knows exactly what they're doing. So the audience, the commentators, the other team, that you're able to see in real time whether or not a mistake was made, or you can react in real time to the decision-making process. And in the case of this game, you'll be able to chirp each other when you miss a shot. And I think, even though it's going to be a skins game, which is pretty exciting, and the money's going to go for charity, I think there's going to be, it's really competitive, because I will say, there's been a lot of chirping within the curling world about Rachel Homan, the women's current two-time defending women. She's kind of on the greatest run in the history of the sport right now. I think she's won like 94% of her games over the last 2 years. And I should say her, but it's her and Tracy Fleury and Sarah Wilkes and Emma Miskew, which is also one of the other problems of curling is I just named 3 curlers and they play on Team Homan. Like, it doesn't give a lot of brand credibility, or I shouldn't say brand credibility, brand power to the other 3 incredible athletes on her team. And so these are some of the things that we're kind of, playing around with this sport is how do we increase brand profile and IP marketability, not only about the sport and the teams, but also of the curlers themselves.
Yeah, it was a great breakdown. It's super interesting. I do remember from the Olympics that they could talk, like that. You refresh my memory of like when I watch it, like that was always a cool thing where you can hear them and they're mic'd up, which is unique. And I think all sports should do that. But anyway, you've been in, obviously now you're in the emerging sport league. You've done betting. You've been in gaming. What are some macro trends you're paying attention to? What's, some things other people should be keeping an eye on that you find interesting in the sporting or ancillary markets around it?
That's a really great question. Obviously, it's impossible not to pay attention to the shifting landscape of content distribution when it relates to sports. Obviously, the streaming conversations, the opportunities around fast these days, not to mention, linear is still pretty vital, but and then you look at all the other platforms that fans are starting to watch, like, Twitch and some of the other streaming platforms online. It's hard to not pay very close attention to those things, especially when you have we have a flywheel in our hands, right? And you look at a sport like F1, like their business is not just predicated on the races every weekend. It's a cultural property, right? And what excites me is looking at a lot of the sports that are fusing culture, fusing event, fusing the sport, fusing it with the power of the athlete. And then at the end of the day, it's all about the fan, right? How do we create as many touch points of engagement so a fan could have fun? Yes, of course, we want them to spend money. But the reality is, I do believe that the future growth of sport is not really predicated on media rights deals like that traditionally have really been the foundation of sport. I think it's all about brand. It's all about trying to tell compelling stories that other brands want to help be a part of. Right. And the cool thing about curling is we also have all of these athletes that are also part of this incredible story. So, we want to make curling cool. Right. And that's the thing, like people have their perception of curling and really, I like thinking about the fact that, we're on a mission. It's kind of like a transformation of perception, right? People have this idea of what curling is and who curlers are. And I got to tell you, for most people are wrong. Right? Because these curlers are young and cool. And these fans, while a majority of the curling fans now are in the older demographic, what I will say, what we've seen over the past 7 months since we've started our Grand Slam of curling season this year in streaming, each event, the demographic of the 55 and up demographic shifts lower by 5%, and the audience of 16 to 29 grows by 5%. Now, that's the kind of trend that gets me very excited. And so at the end of the day, when you look at some of the brands that have historically been involved in curling, they aren't really your sexy, premium, young person focused brands. Well, I want to change that. I want to add them to the other awesome brands that have been supporting this sport for decades and decades, because there's so much opportunity here to play. So I think, to answer your question more succinctly, really it's all about how you can fuse the culture of a sport with the sport itself to create really fun and engaging content, because at the end of the day, it's all about story. And the young fan wants to be captivated, right? It's all about emotion and fun. And if we can really drive into, or really kind of focus in on what makes the curler tick, what makes the curling fan excited, it just gives us so much more room for.
Yeah, it's really cool, man. I'm excited to tune in and check it out. Where can people learn more, Nick? I know you brought it up in the middle. I guess you guys have an app. What's that called? Where can people find that? Like, what's
totally. Thanks, Andrew. slamofcurling.com. is the website of our first property. You can follow us all on socials, Grand Slam of Curling across everything. The app is available both in Android and in the Apple Store. It's GSOC, Grand Slam of Curling. Streaming is free. The app is free. Basically starting on Monday, Battle of the Sexes starts 7 p.m. Eastern. So it's kind of like the perfect April 7th, I should say. It's kind of the perfect appetizer for the NCAA men's final, right? So for all you sports fans out there, you can come and watch some curling before you tune into the NCAA final. And then the Players Championship starts Tuesday morning, goes all the way through Sunday. Every single game is available for free on our app. We have commentary tracks on 2 of the 4. We have broadcast deals in a number of countries around the world. We don't need to get through the details there, but at the end of the day, grandslamofcurling.com. And again, Andrew, it's just the beginning. And I will also say, for any of your fans that are going to be down that live in Nashville or close to Nashville, on April 15th and 16th at T-Line, which is the curling club owned by Mark Bulger in Nashville, we're actually hosting the first ever all-star game and skills competition, which is pretty awesome. Tickets are still available. You can find them at grandslamofcurling.com. 12 of the best curlers in the world, men and women. A bunch of curling legends are coming down. We have a bunch of NFL guys and a bunch of celebrities who love curling who are joining in the fun. And it's just going to be a really fun experience. And we're going to produce that into a proper 2-hour television special that we're already working on distributing that to international partners. Anyone in or around Nashville, all-star game, first ever in the sport. It's going to be absolutely epic.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's exciting. And I appreciate you coming on today, sharing more about curling. Excited to, fast forward a year or 2 years after the Olympics and have you back on and review the progress. And it's super cool, man. I love the emerging league landscape. It's a fun one.
Dude, well, I appreciate the time. Thanks. And I'm a big fan of what you guys do. And I learn a lot from a lot of the folks that you have on. Keep programming great people, man.
Love it.